an international study was released on Monday, and apparently the U.S. is sitting on about 264 billion barrels. That's about 8 billion more than Russia and 52 billion more than Saudi Arabia. It's hard to believe. To talk a little bit about it this morning, it's Tim Snyder. He's an oil industry analyst. And Tim, you're in Dallas this morning, and you're working from home. I guess what your office is near where those horrific shootings occurred last night, right?
Yes, sir. That is correct. We're just up the street from where that all occurred last night.
So is that area, and I don't want to divert too much, but is that area pretty much just blocked off this morning in Dallas completely?
It is. There's so much ongoing right now with the investigation, and with the crowd scattering last night like they did during the demonstration that they had ongoing. It's just there's so many little bits of information that the police have to still put together to really try to make sense out of this terrible, terrible shooting.
All right. Well, getting back to the topic at hand. So we have all of this oil, and I'm going to imagine that there's a couple of reasons why we're not seeing more of it on the market, because it's harder to get to and requires a little different and more expensive technology. And the second reason, then, which kind of ties in with it, is the price for a barrel of oil is still low enough to where it really doesn't make it cost effective to really go after it. Am I even close to being on the right track?
You are right on topic, Bill. You're right on top of it. You know, the issue that we need to look at, though, is we need to go back in 2005 and 2006 when everybody was running around the country telling everybody, telling folks, and I was one of them, I hate to say it, I was one of them, saying we had a finite amount of crude oil that we knew was available and, that we needed to look at renewable sources because at the time we were deriving 63% of the crude oil need that we had to fill refineries here in the United States was coming from foreign oil. Now, that's obviously dropped to 50%, so that's already taken place. But what's made a big difference is really a couple of things. First and foremost, we're talking about recoverable oil. That is the oil that has been identified, and we know we can get to it using, traditional drilling techniques, hydraulic fracturing, or even the horizontal drilling that we've done, the directional drilling. It's all made a big difference in increasing the amount of crude oil that is available for us to be able to extract. That's really what the number is. It's a bigger number in recoverable crude oil. Now, those numbers have changed so significantly in the last 10 years. It tells me that there's probably a higher number as technologies begin to advance and efficiencies begin to hit the market. That number may very well increase.
Well, I'm wondering, because we have these traditional areas where there's oil, Oklahoma, Texas, of course, your home state, et cetera. And
right.
It makes me wonder, as you go deep, because this stuff is deeper, correct, than what would be considered a typical well?
Well, it is somewhat deeper. It's not that we're going from drilling, at 3,000 feet and then all of a sudden we're drilling at 17,000 feet. A lot of it, I saw an oil survey where they had purchased a lease, the driller had purchased a lease that went down 2,000 feet and went horizontally 15,000 feet. So there's a lot of variations, and this is the new way of drilling and extracting that crude oil from a rock formation. It's quite exquisite as you watch how this is all done.
Well, do you think that in the future, because you said that we're probably sitting on more than just the numbers indicate right now. My question is, do you believe, and this is very hypothetical, that we're going to find oil potentially in areas where we never even really considered looking before?
It's quite possible, but at Crudefunders.com, one of the things that we think is very most important is that the next bullish section in crude oil is about to begin. We're at the lows. We're trading at $45 and some change in crude oil right now. We think we're going to see this probably move back up into the low 50s by the end of the year, and then prices are going to start to take off. And as prices move forward a little bit higher, and of course you got to look at it this way, from a pricing standpoint, the markets themselves are looking, the big companies, the smaller drillers, those guys that are out there working real hard right now, they're looking at bringing this production back on a ratable basis. In other words, on a steady basis that doesn't overpower the marketplace. And I read an article just a few minutes ago that came out from CNBC talking about, if the prices do get above $50 and we have to get, early 2017, we've got to go find people. We're looking at 85 to 100,000 new jobs that we've got to fill almost immediately. So that's what we look at Crudefunders, because the opportunity is now to start looking at the next big fund.
All right. Because I've heard different numbers bandied about that to go after most of these types of oil and these types and do this type of work, that you have to have, it's got to be, the price for a barrel has to be minimum of 45 to 52 bucks a barrel. Is that the true ballpark? I mean, that's what I remember hearing. I'm just curious what, you being somebody that's in the industry, what is the baseline, the very bottom of that price range where you can say, okay, it's worth going after?
Okay, you're going to laugh at me when I tell you this, but the bottom of that's probably around $32 or $33 a barrel. On top of that, we do have some higher, more expensive type drilling opportunities, things that are a little bit more involved, that are going to take just a little bit higher. We say $50 because that's a sustainable number. That's something that we believe can put profits back into the oil companies, create jobs, help move the economy forward. I interviewed, actually, a gentleman at the University of Texas. He's the director of the Bureau of Economic Geology. His name is Dr. Scott Tinker. And, one of the things that he told us is that, the cost of the hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling has literally dropped by a third since the middle of 2014 and up to today. So that is a significant advancement in the reduction in the cost of production, so that we can live with a lower price of crude oil for a longer period of time as it accelerates past $50. So we're talking $50 to $70 range is something that's quite profitable and is exactly what the U.S. economy needs, Bill.
So at $32 a barrel, I'm assuming that most folks don't want to get into the game, even though they could make a little bit of money. They don't want to get into it just because it is such a slim margin. Well,
now remember, I'm not talking about the crude oil price on the futures market and the price of a barrel of crude oil at $32. I'm talking about what it costs me to drill it. Okay, my cost to drill that barrel of crude oil is probably about, in some formations, about $32, $33 a barrel. So if the market's trading at 45, I've got room to do the development that has to go on around that, so I can get infrastructure, so I can get the crude to the marketplace, so I can pay staff to get to service the well and do the things that we need to do. And that's really and truthfully what we're talking about here. The profits become tangible at above $50 a barrel, and that's when the banks are starting to look at, CapEx expenditures with the big oil companies. They're starting to look at 2017 changing their CapEx profile.
All right, I want my final thing I want to ask about is, because a lot of people view, when you start talking about oil, the first thing that they start flashing in their heads are logos for BP, Exxon, Standard, etc.
Right.
But from my reading, most of the oil that's produced here in the United States is produced by small companies and then sold to the large oil conglomerates. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And what percentage would you say, then, of the oil that we produce in this country is directly produced by these, small guys and gals, these small companies as opposed to, BP or Exxon?
It's funny. I asked that question. I postulated that about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, and I asked that question of several oil company executives and folks that I know in the industry. They're telling me about 65% of the crude oil that's produced in the United States comes from a smaller entity that is eventually sold to the Exxons and the BPs and the bigger companies, Chevron. So it's important to see that companies like Patterson-UTI and Devon Energy and those, even Chesapeake with their natural gas exposure, those smaller entities are the true lifeblood of our economy. It's important to help keep them going and keep them sustained.
Did you say 65 or 55%?
65.
65. All right. Tom?
Isn't that a crazy number?
Yeah, it is. It's a huge number. Tim, I appreciate you joining us on the Wake Up Call this morning. A pleasure talking to you, and we'll look forward to having you back on in the future.
You bet, Bill. I appreciate being with you in Eugene, Oregon.
Well, thank you. You take care, Tim. Be careful back there in Dallas. Oil industry analyst Tim Snyder.